Welcome to the Follow the Leaders podcast, where we get a glimpse into the minds and lives of exceptional leaders and hear about their experiences, insights, and strategies for success. On today's episode, we'll hear from one heart-centered, effective leader and hear about their wisdom and perspective. So get ready to follow along. Hello, and welcome to the Follow the Leaders podcast. I am so excited to be here with you, and thank you for listening. I am Jamie Gale, and I am the host. And today I am so excited to have Dr. Alison Craig on the podcast with me. Dr. Alison Craig is a general pediatrician and the Senior Medical Director of Primary Care, Urgent Care, Sports Medicine, and Dermatology at a local nonprofit healthcare system that serves approximately 60,000 patients in and around Dane County in Wisconsin. She has management responsibilities for 80 physicians, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants. Dr. Craig partners with the clinical operations director, who has management responsibilities for the rest of the care team staff. Dr. Craig is also the co-chair of her healthcare system's LGBTQ+ health committee. Dr. Craig views her role as supporting a healthcare system that allows the providers to do their best work on behalf of their patients. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Craig.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm delighted to be here today.
I'm really grateful that you're taking the time to share with us your leadership experience, and you're doing such amazing work for our community. And as a mom and a youth program specialist, I'm especially grateful and appreciative of all that you do for the children in our community. So thank you again for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
So fill us in on your work life. What is all on your plate in that front?
That's such a big question. I work for a nonprofit health system, and though we are big enough to do a lot of great things in healthcare and take on a lot of cool new initiatives to keep us innovative, because of our size, a lot of us in leadership wear a ton of different hats. And so I find myself in our organization being a little bit HR, a little bit coach, a little bit mentor. I facilitate a lot of our education programs for the providers. I feel I'm also at the hub of a lot of communication, our quality and process improvement departments, and have a lot of relationships across all of the different departments of our organization. So I feel like the scope of my job is really exciting because it's so diverse. There's so many things I can tap into.
Fill us in on how you decided to step into that role. This is a big job you have.
Yeah. I was trained here at the UW through my medical school and pediatric residency. And when I came out of residency, I just wanted to focus on being the best pediatrician I could be. So I really spent the first 10 years of my practice just honing my craft as a pediatrician, making connections with families and patients, and really filling out my knowledge base when it came to pediatric medicine and adolescent medicine. And then there was this opportunity. We had a little bit of leadership transitions at the organization, and an opportunity opened up. And I hadn't really planned or plotted to be in leadership, but then the opening opened up, and I was like, hey, I don't know if I want anyone else to be my boss right now. And sometimes you just have to take the leap and try something new, try a new hat on. So I did that at one of our larger clinics, the Capital Clinic. And it was such a great learning experience to step into that first leadership role. And it was exciting. And I feel like I kind of caught the bug. Like, I want to be in the room where it happens, kind of to help move things in a positive direction. I really felt invested in everyone's success. And so I wanted to just contribute in that way. So that was about 10 years ago, which kind of blows my mind that I feel like I blinked and 10 years have gone past since that time when I threw my name into the hat.
So you had this moment where you were saying to yourself, I don't know if I want anybody to be my boss. I'm curious, is that a pattern for you? Sometimes people in leadership tend to gravitate towards the leadership roles in whatever setting they're in, schools, clubs, everything like that. So was this outside of the norm for you, or was this something you had confidence for because of your past experiences in leadership?
I think that's a really good question. And if I reflect on my childhood and my high school years, my college years, I think I was always a kind of lean in type of person. Like if there was an opportunity, I remember being in student council in high school, and there would be opportunities or people eliciting, feedback or questions or ideas. And my hand would like go up right away every single time somebody was asking for ideas and input. And I think if I'm being honest with myself, I've always been kind of a person that wanted to lean into the work and lean into solving problems. So, but at the time when I made the choice, I don't know that I really envisioned like, oh, I'm going to be in medical leadership. I think I was just like trying to be a really good pediatrician. And then just the stars sort of aligned with this opportunity for me to kind of take a pause and go, oh, I have other skill sets and I really feel like maybe what my lived experience has been as a human being and as a scientist and as a pediatrician could be additive to the work.
Yeah, I love that story about the student council. I can personally relate as a fellow student council nerd
Yes.
from the past. And yeah, I completely relate to that there's just sometimes you can see a situation and you have something to contribute and you're willing to do it. I really think lots of people have the ideas inside, but being willing to step forward and speak up and put yourself on the line there, I think I completely relate to that.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a joke at my organization too, that if you have a lot of ideas or if you complain about a lot of things, you're likely to get assigned new roles and new work, right? So if you complain, if you have a lot of ideas, you're going to get tapped to help contribute. So I think I was that type of person, not necessarily in the complaint space, but in the like contribution. Oh, we could do this, or wouldn't this be a great idea? And then if you do that long enough, I think people start looking at you going, maybe you could take that on. That sounds like a great you thing. And so luckily I was at the type of organization that saw that the eagerness and was willing to give me a shot in the role.
Okay, so here's another childhood question. Do you remember your first leadership role, whether it was informal or formal, like a first time?
Well, one of the things that I remember really distinctly is being a pretty engaged person on my Little League team as like a first grader and second grader. I grew up in a community in central Pennsylvania that didn't have softball for girls. And so I was pretty sporty at the time and was the only girl in my Little League team. And I definitely remember being kind of trying to get everyone to hustle up and get the team on track and focused. And I was that kind of lean in even at that age. And it was also a pretty good opportunity to kind of figure out navigating being a woman and having a voice at the table. And so, yeah, being the only girl in Little League was definitely formative for me. And then also another childhood memory was selling Girl Scout cookies, where I was like large and in charge of like my wagon and my sheets and like going around all the neighbors and asking them essentially for money in exchange for cookies, and being very comprehensive about that at that early age. So there was I look back and think fondly of kind of what a like spunky little kid I was. And when I've gone through this leadership path, there have been times when I've like looked back on photos and see this like serious, very well-intended, try hard type of kid and go, oh, I really haven't changed that much. I'm still that kid on the inside.
It's so interesting. You and I both work with kids. In our previous conversation, you told me that you have maintained your pediatrics practice in addition to this leadership role, which we can talk more about. But you work with children, I work with children, obviously very different ways. But when I think about these stories, like your Girl Scout story and your softball story, I have similar stories. And I think when I'm working with these kids, it's what I want to get that message across to these children too, is like who you are is who you are, and step into it. Because what I'm hearing you say is that you still are that same kid, and the talents that we have as children often end up being where our heart is and where our happiness is as adults. So I thank you for sharing those childhood stories. I appreciate that.
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of similarity between those Girl Scout cookie forms and the Excel spreadsheets that I dive into nowadays. Also, I think of it kind of as a pediatrician. I look at kids right now and think, oh, we talk about the cliche of like today's kids are tomorrow's leaders, but truly they are. When you look at my son is graduating from high school this year, and I look at his peers, and I think, in not that long a time, in like 5, 10, 15 years, they're going to be the future, HR directors and the future lab technicians and the future leaders of nonprofits and the future educators. It starts really becoming very real that the kids today are the ones that are going to be helping us through the challenges in the decades ahead. And so I really try to think of kids as future leaders. I don't know if anyone ever envisioned my little Girl Scout cookie kid self as being that future senior medical director of a healthcare organization, but that's exactly what's happened.
It's pretty cool, right?
It is cool. Pediatricians always think of life in developmental stages. And so, we talk about, what a 12-month-old does, or like a child being very, very 3, or a child being very 8, or a 13-year-old being very 13. But it continues beyond that to, like, lately I've been making a joke about, I feel very 51, like I'm very in my 51-year-old phase of development, right? And that's very unique compared to where I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So the arc continues.
The arc continues. I love that. So, okay, in your 51-year-old self, right now, as you're in this developmental stage, with all of the hats that you do wear, how do you balance being a human at this age, at this time, for the first time, with being in this leadership role where you're expected to have the answers and you're expected to know,
Mm-hmm.
you're expected to be the head of this. And so
Yeah.
how do you balance your everyday human life with the deep, important responsibilities that you have in your life-changing and life-saving work?
I think the thing that has really helped me is sort of kind of embracing some humility about who we are, and as leaders, or we all have sort of positional power and positional responsibility that goes along with that. And it can get kind of heady. And I think that people can have the perception that, it's all ego. It's all, you must think really highly of yourself. You must feel really competent. And in truth, a lot of the times, I think approaching leadership for me is having to really be comfortable looking at myself as still in a growth phase, still a learner, still not knowing all the answers, and just trying to make the best decisions that you can with the information that you have. And there have been times when I started in leadership, I was always looking for the grown-up in the room. Again, kind of as a pediatrician, I think of like kids and grown-ups, but I was always looking for who's the grown-up in the room. And early on, I had some conversations with one of my friends who is in kind of high level organization consulting. And I said to him, I'm always looking for the grown up in the room. And he leaned in and said, Alison, the truth is there are no grown ups in the room. They're just people with more power, people with more experience. But really, we're just the kids that we were. And we are now, having more responsibility. And I was like, oh no. Oh no, there's no grown-ups in the room. And then realizing, the reality of that is that we all are still, or should be, if we're being honest and authentic with ourselves, that we're all in a space of learning and growing. And, I had to manage a very tough incident that was very stressful and traumatic for some of the staff, related to kind of a false alarm that happened recently in our clinic. And I did my best to kind of support the team and consider trauma-informed leadership as I was helping everybody through that. But that's not something that I got, there was a course in medical school. There were not those types of leadership curriculum courses in medical school. And there's a lot of that is just still like trying to lead with an open heart and an open mind, and understand the people, the human beings that you're working with, and how to support them. And so I just think that a lot of the times people are looking for those leaders to know all the answers, but a lot of the times it's just just us trying to do our best and then applying our values to the situation and our experience to the situation. But a lot of it's a learning curve, and if you don't accept that, then I think that you will get into that heady space of thinking that you know it all. And I'm not sure you'll have the best outcomes if that's where you get.
Yeah, first of all, that totally makes sense. And I can tell that you lead with your heart. And that is probably why you've been such an effective leader, is because you do come to the work curious and learning, and not as though you have all the answers. In our leadership roles, oftentimes we do have to suddenly act as if we did have the information. And, you mentioned the false alarm situation. I'm sure there's been dozens of other times when you have had to make decisions that you have had to be the one with the answers, and you're expected to, and coming in as a learner isn't acceptable in those moments, because everybody's looking to you as the flight attendant to say, we got this, it's okay, the turbulence is fine. So I'm curious, how do you work through those moments, in those moments where you need to be the answer, you need to have the answer? How do you navigate that?
I think partly it's about understanding what responsibility you have to the circumstance, right? So I do think that when I definitely inject a direction once we've had that processing of the information, right? And one of my skills, I think generally, is that I am able to make decisions in a timely fashion, but not, hopefully find the right time to make those decisions. Not too soon, not too late, but sort of find that right spot, that right balance spot. And you're not going to always make that decision at the right time. I think that's a skill set that I have brought to the table, that I am able to make decisions and still be thoughtful about what collecting the information first. One of the things I learned early on was that you're never going to be 100% confident about a decision. If you're lucky, if you've done the right work and you've done the right collaboration specifically and listened, you can get to like 80% confidence level. And once you get to about 80% confidence level, that's a good time to drop the decision, or like say, okay, we're going to go this way, knowing that in the subsequent time period, the subsequent hours, days, weeks, you are going to learn all the things why maybe this decision wasn't the right path. And you'll have another 10% of like troubleshooting and problem solving and polishing. I don't think you'll ever get to 100% confidence. There's always going to be unintended ripples that may continue to be like thorns down the way. But yeah, getting to 80% and finding a time to make the decision. So I do lean into that work, and that's vulnerable, right? Because when you're making those decisions, you're putting yourself kind of in the arena, centered into the arena. And that's a good space to throw tomatoes at that person that's centered in that arena. And it's taken me some time to grapple and get more comfortable with that space of, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea at that moment. And you have to still stay upright and kind of be true to the why of the decision that you made.
I love that. That is so very true. I hadn't ever thought about a percentage, but that totally makes sense. I love that framework. And I think that the listeners will also find that to be a really helpful sort of permission to go with it at a certain point, and go with it when you get to 80%. And I also really love how you describe the learning afterwards. It made me think about how sometimes the needs and goals of the organization are different than the needs and goals of the individuals in the organization. And in your very high up leadership role that you have, you, I'm sure, deal with this dynamic between the conflicting needs and goals and desires of the individuals, the team members, from your many, many providers that you have in your system to your teammates that are your colleagues, balancing that, and even your own personal needs and desires in your day-to-day life with the overarching needs and goals of the organization. So I'm just curious if you have anything comes to mind about how you sort of navigate that.
Yeah, I think the metaphor analogy that I use for that is that there's the individual needs, and then there's maybe the organization's needs or the team's needs. And you can approach each other and with best intention and with transparency about what's needed on all sides. And you approach each other, and sometimes you can approach each other and you get to a gap. It's kind of like, I think of it like a gap in an iceberg where you're like on one person's on one side and one person's on the other side. And you kind of look down, there's this chasm, there's this gap, and you have to decide whether you can close that gap or whether one person can leap across that gap. But if you're honest and you're transparent and you're respectful and you acknowledge that there is a difference of perspective or difference of priority, that sometimes you get to a point where that gap, that chasm is not surmountable. And for me, what's kept me kind of whole emotionally and psychologically when that happens is just being honest and respectful about it and not blaming. It's not anyone's fault that there's a gap. There is just accountabilities that we all have that sometimes we can't surmount. So in an organization, there's a lot of, especially healthcare right now, there's a lot of need for more standardization. But standardization can sometimes feel like a loss when it comes to individual practice styles. And so at our organization, we try to balance standardization for customization so that there's a balance. Having more standardization doesn't mean that there's no, individual practice styles that are permitted amongst like doctors or nurse practitioners or physician assistants. It just means that we need a little bit more standardization to be able to like achieve some efficiencies. Standardization is also a really great way to achieve health equity, to make sure all patients are being treated and have the same opportunities for achieving their healthcare goals. But sometimes standardization can feel a little bit restricting. And so we're constantly trying to have to navigate that balance between standardization and customization or individual practice. And sometimes you can close that gap through compromise and creativity and innovation, and sometimes you can't. But I try to have that process, almost that negotiation process, be very respectful and understanding that we're not here to convince other people of the other perspective. We're here to like find a solution where we have shared goals and mutual understanding. So if you can get to the mutual understanding part, those gaps feel less painful, and it's easier to, even if you have to walk away from the situation, you can do so still with like great human respect for the other person.
I love that. And I really love how you explained how you really go through it with transparency. I almost feel like this is opposite of how it was told to us when we were younger about like, no, the people at the top make the decisions behind closed doors and you have to accept it. And I do feel this big shift happening in leadership, especially with leaders that are coming at things from their heart. It is much more transparent and you do get much more buy-in from your team members and you can close those chasms much more easily. So I really love what you said about that. Do you feel like that is different than what you thought being in leadership would be like? Or is this kind of what you expected?
That's a great question. I think when I started in leadership, I was hoping that leadership had space for me, meaning that I know the kind of instincts that I have towards communication, transparency, collaboration. And I was really curious at the beginning, like, is this going to work out between me and leadership? I wasn't sure. I guess I've always sort of felt slightly like awkward duckling-ish since I was a child about like how I show up in the world. And so I was like, this is not I don't fit neatly into the cookie cutter of the type of leaders I saw through my educational path, through my career paths ahead of me. So I was not really, really sure. And so I think I've always sort of had this underdog mentality about leadership, thinking like, okay, I want to try to see if my kind of leadership can be successful in this space. And I think I'm happy to report that, 10 years in, that I think leadership, as I'm anthropomorphizing leadership, leadership has moved closer to that in at least my organization for sure. And I think in healthcare overall, and the kind of humanistic, transparent, respectful approaches towards trying to weather change and weather challenges is proving to be more effective. Now, I don't want to paint too glossy of a picture. I'm like, oh yes, we've arrived. We're definitely not arrived, but I think that there is space. I feel like, I've been in this role for 10 years and this is the kind of values and the mentality I bring to it. And I haven't been told to walk the plank yet, so it must be okay. and that's a good thing. So yeah, I do think that historically, like, structures of leadership can have been very top down in healthcare, but more and more we're talking about the experts being those closest to the care, the experts being the local teams that are doing the work. And with that great respect for those closest to the work, I think we've had a better balance between what is top down, what requires tight leadership and tight direction, the why, the finances, the external driving forces, and then where is the engine for innovation is really locally. And then once we find those best practices, then we try to then translate that into more best practice standards across the entire organization, which then kind of moves back into a little bit more tight standardization across the leadership, across the organization. So we call this like tight, loose, tight kind of leadership, where that there's the why, the direction, the values, the mission, the vision, and then there's like that local innovation engine that respects the human beings closest to the work. And then you move it back into, okay, now we want to standardize some of those best practices. And so this leadership style, this framework totally fits with the way what my individual values are. And so I think that helps me a lot in feeling really good about the work we're doing at my organization. And I think in a lot of spaces in healthcare.
I haven't heard that tight, loose, tight framework, and I love it. I love it so much. I think it is really applicable not just to your healthcare organization, but so many other organizations. And I really love that. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned that the leadership that you saw when you were younger, you didn't know if there was space for you there. And I'm just curious what you meant by that. And was it more of an internal looking, or was it parts of your identity?
Well, I'll give an example. When I was in my medical training, during rounds, there was kind of a huddle with some of the students and a couple of the distinguished faculty members, and somebody who was renowned in his field, who was a retired faculty member, maybe a little on the old school side, just started, pontificating about leadership roles in healthcare. And he said, why that there aren't more women in healthcare leadership or in full professor faculty positions. And we all were like, oh no, tell us why. And he said, because they lack the ambition. And he said that just very flatly, and that's very extreme. So it probably causes some of your listeners to cringe a little bit. But and this, I'm 51. This was probably in my late 20s, mid to late 20s. It's not that long ago.
No, wow.
And I was kind of floored by this, and very much like, okay, know your situation. You're just a medical student. I might have been a resident at the time. You need your recommendations. You're just going to lay low and let that sort of land with the rest of the group and walk away from that. So, I mean, I think that there are, broadly speaking, that, if you were cis, white, male, that was sort of like the largely the faces of leadership in a lot of healthcare spaces, not just at my organization. And we've really had a big shift, or at least in the space for women in leadership. There's still a lot of work to be done locally in having more leaders of color represented in all of the leadership spaces across town, or many of the leadership spaces. But for myself, coming into this, I identify as a person of color. I have Asian American and European biracial background, and being just also temperamentally kind of the quirky kid that I am, that I actually embrace. I love being quirky and a little weird and a little nerdy. And so a little bit, data wonky, that all those things about myself, I love and embrace. But I wasn't sure if I was going to fit in with blue suits and white shirts and ties. I didn't know. And there were very much times when I was in leadership spaces and I felt like I was the kind of only one in the room that had a different perspective. And luckily I was at an organization that was going through some transformation when it came to women in leadership. And I feel really grateful for our current leadership team that is much more diverse in that space now.
Well, and as a part of this community, I am also very grateful that the door was open for you and you opened it yourself. And yeah.
I'll just add that it took advocates on our leadership team too. There was a time where I was in a space where every time I spoke or said something, I'm very well intended. I think I have a lot of positive intention, but I'm also pretty serious, as you can tell. Like I kind of lean into things kind of with intensity. And every time I spoke in this committee space, there was a few in the room that like to just sort of make light of it or make a little joke after every time I spoke. And I hadn't experienced that so much in academic spaces. And this was a little bit more of a corporate space. And I had to kind of lean over to one of my colleagues and was like, is this happening? And he was like, yeah, I'm observing that too. It was very validating, which I really appreciated. And he helped by kind of disrupting some of the pattern and his contributions to the meeting and validating, I hear what Dr. Craig is saying. I think this is really important. I think we should, listen to this. And that was super validating. I think that helped me feel safer to know that I wasn't the only person kind of observing some of the patterns. And a lot of that is much better now, 10, 15 years later. But it's not better for everyone. And it's not better all the time. And it's not better in all the spaces. And so I have to be honest about how, again, we haven't arrived. We are definitely on a journey in healthcare and in Madison for sure.
So that is absolutely true. Yeah. In and outside of the medical field, really everywhere. So yes, thank you for sharing that. So if you were going to let's pretend that you could teleport and you could give Dr. Craig in this role some information about what this role was going to be like. If you could give yourself a message with the wisdom and the experience that you have now, 10 years later, what would you tell her on her first day in this new role?
One of the things that I've had to become more comfortable with is embracing mistakes. And in fact, expect mistakes, don't regret mistakes, use them as that learning ground. The reason I mention that is because I sometimes make the joke that I am a recovering pre-medical student. And as a recovering pre-medical student who at the time you had to be pretty darn perfect all the time to be able to be a candidate for medical school, I think that ingrained in me temperamentally kind of an aversion to mistakes and an aversion to embarrassing myself. And that I think I would go back and try to help coach myself earlier or faster. I had to learn it the hard way over the last 10 years. I made plenty of mistakes. I embarrassed myself on the regular, and I'm luckily surrounded by other people who, understand that how important it is to sometimes try and to sometimes fail, and with good intention and with thoughtfulness and recover and move forward. I think that has been a harder learned lesson, but I'm glad to be here. In fact, I was just thinking about how much I felt like I've become a better human being in leadership just because I have had to go through some of those growing pains. And it's allowed me to be probably just a more empathetic human being. I thought I was pretty empathetic and compassionate as a pediatrician in practice, but I think being in leadership and having to recover from mistakes and feel like how to recover from those things has really made me more compassionate to other human beings and their experiences, which is a good thing overall.
I love that. Let's make it into a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. I have a few quick questions for you, just to kind of finish up our conversation. Okay. Does anyone come to mind that you could shout out that believed in your ability to lead, maybe before you even did, or who really encouraged you along the way?
Oh yeah. There's so many people that are worthy of shout outs. And maybe this is going to be a little cliche, but it's so true for me personally, is that I am blessed to have a mom who has never doubted my potential, and like the ability to accept kind of me as I am and show up in all the ways that I show up. I feel really grateful to have had that bedrock and that foundation I think sometimes she is like, it boggles her mind that I'm willing to step into leadership so much. She's rather introverted and I'm rather extroverted. And so but she just like celebrates me. And even when I come to her, like feeling like I've made mistakes, she's just very constant in her support and reassurance. The other thing that I realized is that I didn't realize this until I got to medical school. Actually, it's kind of silly, but she is a scientist. So my mother grew up in Madison in the 1960s, and she wasn't permitted to take physics in high school because it was not a course that girls were supposed to take. And she persevered and went to the UW and developed a career in audiology, the hearing science, and actually was a full professor at UW Milwaukee in hearing science. In hearing science is all physics, by the way, which is the great irony of the fact that she couldn't take it in high school. But she was a woman in science. And it really didn't occur to me that everybody didn't have a mom who's a woman in science. I thought everybody did. So I think that the fact that she was able to be a pioneer in science at that time and persevere through a lot of barriers to a career in science for women made it a smoother path for me going ahead. And so the combination of those two things, her belief in me and her unconditional love, in addition to her path, that's really made it easy for me to be a leader in science.
That's so cool. And don't we all want to be talked about by our children in that way someday? So that's really beautiful. Okay, finish this sentence. One thing people don't know or realize about my work is...
One thing that people don't know about my work is that I'm a human being too. I think sometimes leaders can get dehumanized. You know, I hear it's sort of othering of leaders or, the senior leadership team, but not really understanding that they're human beings that are trying to make the best decisions for the benefit of the organization. And they're on their own journey of like learning and sometimes making mistakes. And I think that it's easy when you're in, when you look up to leadership, sometimes it's easier to not really think of them as human beings. And I guess it's more of that. I wish that people would see that the human being in everyone at the organization, it's not just responsibility for leaders to look at the staff as human beings, but I kind of I hope that other people can also see that those in leadership are also human beings and doing their best.
I love it. Totally agree. Okay, my last question for you. If you had a day off from work and from all of your official responsibilities in life, and you had to take the entire day to enjoy yourself in Madison, what is one activity that you would do during the day and one place you would go for something delicious to eat?
So many choices. I guess the one thing is that one of my favorite things to do when I am, quote, not working, and I call it when I'm just Alison, is to have actually no plans at all. I call it my pokey little puppy days, where I just it's like from a golden book from like the 1970s, that pokey little puppy just followed their nose. And my favorite thing to do is to embark on the day without a specific plan. And so that might take me to go get pancakes at the Original Pancake House, which is their Dutch babies are amazing. That's my yummy thing. Or it might take me to the West Side Farmers Market to get tortillas from Los Angeles Tortillas, which are the best. Or I might go paddleboarding, or I might just go home and sit in my garden and just like pokey little puppy day. That's my wish, is just not to have a plan at all and just be Alison and just follow my nose.
I love it. That sounds amazing. That is so great. Well, is there anything else that you want listeners to know about you or your leadership role or your organization before we finish up?
No, I mean, nothing specific. I think it's been a lovely time speaking with you today about leadership. It's fun. I am honored to be interviewed. I'm honored to be invited to participate in the journey of your podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Craig. And thank you all for listening. We will be back next time with another awesome leadership story. Thank you so much. Follow the Leaders is produced by Lit Path Studios and music is by Shane Ivers. You can hear more about this show and all the other podcasts at Lit Path Studios by going to www.litpathstudios.com.